There was once a kingdom that forgot how to see the light. Not because the sun stopped rising, it did, every morning faithfully, as suns tend to do. But the people had grown so accustomed to living in fear that they stopped looking up. The kingdom was called Vaelthorn, and Vaelthorn had a secret. Its shadows moved. Not the way shadows normally move, obedient, loyal to whatever light commands them. These shadows drifted. They gathered in corners where no one had stood. They pooled beneath doors that were locked from the inside. They whispered. Most people in Vaelthorn had learned to pretend they didn't notice. But the prince had been listening.
His name was Prince Sael. He was not the kind of prince the stories usually bother with. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't particularly brave, or clever, or blessed by the gods. He was, by most accounts, quiet. He spent his nights in the palace library not reading about battles or kingdoms, but reading about the dark, what ancient scholars believed lived inside it, what old religions said the shadows carried with them, and whether anyone had ever truly listened to what the dark was trying to say.
It had started when Sael was 7 years old. He'd woken from a nightmare, the kind children have, vivid and enormous, and crept into the corridor to find his nursemaid. But in the corridor, a shadow had stopped. Not passed, not drifted, stopped. And when Sael had pressed his hand against the cold wall, the shadow had pressed back. He was not afraid. That was the part that would later define his entire life. He was curious. The palace had one rule that was older than the kingdom itself. Do not open the iron door. It sat at the bottom of the east dungeon, beneath 3 locked gates, behind a wall of chains the thickness of a man's arm. No one alive knew who had chained it. No one alive admitted to knowing what was behind it. But the shadows did, and on the night of Sael's 18th year, they told him. He hadn't wanted to go. That's important to understand. Sael was not reckless. He had spent 11 years listening to the shadows, learning to understand them the way some people learn a second language, slowly, through pattern and repetition and feeling, more than words. And what the shadows told him on that night was not an invitation. It was a warning. Something behind the iron door was waking up, and it had been awake long enough to be angry.
He pressed his ear to the iron. The cold of it bit into his cheek like a blade. Beyond it, beyond the layers of metal and chain and stone, he heard something. Not a roar, not a scream. Breathing. Slow and ancient and patient. The kind of breathing that belongs to something that measures time in centuries.
"You are the first," the voice said. Not loud, just present, like it was already inside the room with him. The first in 300 years to hear us without running. Sael's torch flickered. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was steadier than he expected. "We are what your kingdom locked away," the voice answered. "We are the shadow your ancestors cut from the light and called a monster. We are the part of your bloodline that your family chose to forget."
The voice, the being, behind the door told Sael what no history book had recorded. Vaelthorn had not always been a kingdom of dread. Once, it was a kingdom of balance. The first king had ruled alongside a being of living shadow, not a servant, not a weapon, a partner. Together, they governed day and its twin, the dark between the stars. But balance, as it always does with men who hunger for power, became inconvenient.
The first king's grandson feared what he did not understand. He gathered his court sorcerers, he forged the iron chains, and on a night when the shadow being had no reason to distrust him, when its guard was completely down, he struck. Not to destroy it, he couldn't. Some things are too old, too woven into the world to be simply ended. So he imprisoned it instead, and told his people, "I have saved you." And the shadows, ever since, the shadows had never forgotten.
He removed the chains one by one. Each one fell like a thunderclap. The dungeon shook. The torches died. And in the absolute darkness, in the breathless, ancient dark, the iron door opened. Not with violence, not with fury, with something that felt, almost impossibly, like relief.
It was enormous and ancient and sad in a way that no single human life has ever had enough time to be sad. It looked at Sael. And Sael, the quiet prince, the boy who listened, the heir to a kingdom built on a lie, reached up his hand the same way he had at 7 years old, against a cold wall in a dark corridor. The shadow reached back.
By morning, the mist was gone. Not replaced by blinding light. That's not how balance works. The sky over Vaelthorn was something it had never been before. Both. Warm gold alongside cool violet. Light that knew it needed shadow to give it meaning. Shadow that stretched gently, protectively, not to frighten, but to rest upon the things that needed shelter. The people came out of their homes, and for the first time in 300 years, they looked up. They called Sael many things after. The Shadow King, the Unchainer, the Mad Prince who freed the dark. But those who knew him, truly knew him, they called him by what he had always been. The boy who listened. The prince who understood that darkness is not the absence of light. It is light's most faithful companion. Somewhere, right now, a child presses their hand against a wall in the dark, and the shadow presses back. And the question, the only question that has ever mattered, is whether they run, or whether they stay and listen. The Prince Who Spoke to Shadows is a story about fear, about what we lock away in iron doors, in dungeons, in history books we choose not to read, and what happens when one quiet, curious person decides to listen instead. Thank you for watching. If this story found something in you, share it with someone who needs it. Until next time, stay curious of the dark.